Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 1017. Hey, if you want to download this workbook 1017 to 1020, click on the link below the video. Hey, we have a great video here. We're going to accomplish two main things. We're going to see how to create a worksheet to calculate BMX State Points. And there's a bunch of stuff that goes into calculating for the state championship what your points are. And if you want to learn some really cool basic Excel stuff, here is a list of all the things we'll see in this video. All right, now let's check out how state points are calculated. There's in the state of Washington, there's these many races at the locations, the dates, and then here's the final. As we race in the different races, we put the place and the category. So if you start off as a novice, at some point you move up to intermediate, right, or expert. You are assigned some points based on your place and your class, and that'll come from this table, and we'll see how to create this table in just a moment. Then you also get bonus points. So depending on how many local races, you'd go over to this table, and it tells you up to 4 bonus points. So down here, I've done this manually. The 4 biggest results that you have points come from this category. So if I were to do it manually, I'd add those up, get 60, and put it here. I would then look at the local races, use this table, and see that I get 1 extra bonus point. Points from the final, that would come from here, and then I would total them. But we want to totally automate everything here so that all these points are automatically calculated. All we have to do is put our place and our class. Everything else calculated automatically. All right, I'm going to delete all this. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the table to determine your state points that are used to calculate points for this column. Now this is the first column has first, second, through all the way through 8. 8 is the max that can fit on the gate, and then did not qualify if you didn't make it to the main. Here are the points for experts from 20 down to 13. The intermediate gets exactly 1 less points if they win 1 to 8, and novice gets exactly 1 point less than the intermediate. So we're going to create this table with a formula. Now, we're going to type an equal sign to create a formula and click on H4, which is a relative cell reference. As I copied over and down, it'll always be looking 1 to my left, and that'll work perfect. So I can simply subtract 1. I'm going to Ctrl Enter to put that formula in. I'm going to point to that little box in the corner, the fill handle. When I see my cursor turn to a crosshair or an angry rabbit, I can click and drag. I stop and grab it a second time, and then drag it down. I come to the very last cell, click in it, and hit F2 to check, and boom, there it is. 1 cell to my left, -1. And notice that works perfect because we take 1 away from 12 to get the novice from the intermediate, and 1 away from the expert to get the intermediate score. Now we've completed our table. Now we want to assign points based on place and class from this table. But before we do our lookup formula in this column to automate that, we want to think about the user entering data here. So in this column here, we've designated an N as the representing novice. What if, because our formula is going to be relying on the fact that we only put an N there. If someone comes along and types NOV for novice, that'll mess up our formula. So we're going to use something called data validation. Data validation just says, hey, only a certain kind of data can go into these cells. Now for this column, I'm going to go ahead and highlight it. And we're going to do it once for this column and a second time for this column. I'm going to do it the first time the long way, and then I'm going to show you keyboard shortcuts. Now we've highlighted the cells that we want to add data validation. We go to the data, and then over to data validation and data validation. Right now, the default is allow any value. That's the default. That makes sense. But we don't want to allow any value. We want a list. And this source dialog pops up, and I can point to the title bar and move it. But my cursor's flashing there, and I'm saying, hey, I'm going to highlight these cells. Anytime you see a collapse button like that, it's great. It means you can put cell references into this text box, and it will be linked to the cells. Look at this over here. Ignore blanks and in-cell dropdown. Isn't that cool? Click OK. Now, if I come down here, I have an N. I can put an N in. If I try to type NOV and hit Enter, it says, no way. I'm going to retry. I'm going to delete that. Now, keyboard shortcuts. If you do data validation, or whatever you do day in and day out in Excel, if you do it the same thing all the time, then it's worth learning keyboards. All right, you ready? The keyboard is Alt-DL. Now, that opens up this dialog box. To get to the Allow, you hit Tab. To get to the list in this drop-down list, you type L. And then to get to the source text box, you hit Tab. Now, let's do that all together in fast speed. Alt-D-L, Tab, L, Tab. And there you have it. Quick and easy. Of course, if you don't do it all the time, you don't remember. But if it's something you do all the time, man, that is fast. All right, now I'm going to highlight this whole column. So now, in these cells, we're going to have a drop-down, and only these values will be allowed. Now, let's test this data validation drop-down list out. I'm going to select a 5 from the drop-down and select an int. Absolutely beautiful. So we can enter 2 values, and now we need a lookup formula that will determine the points from this table. Now, I'm actually going to, this formula is going to get long and hang out and obscure our view of the table. So I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to highlight, click on the G, and drag over to J. And I'm going to change the column width of all 4 columns at the same time. I point between G and H and click and drag. So now the table's a little bit smaller. Now I'm going to expand the width of this F column. Well, like maybe that far right there. And we'll come back and look at that other table in just a moment. Now, here we go. Here's our formula. Well, what are we going to need this formula in this cell to do? It needs to find place 2, which would give us this row right here, and then the class N, which would give us this column right here. And that intersecting value 17 is what the formula needs to retrieve and bring back to the cell. No problem. I'm going to use VLOOKUP and MATCH together. VLOOKUP, VL tab. That gets us our VLOOKUP function. Now, these arguments are helpful. Reading the screen tip, they'll help us fill out this function and what it requires. Lookup value, hey, we're going to give it this 2 so it can look up the 2. I'm going to type a comma. The table, I'm going to highlight not the field names at the top, but just our table. And I'm going to hit the F4 key because that range, as I copy the formula down, has to be locked and not move as a relative cell reference. So I hit the F4 key. That puts the dollar signs in, which says this is a locked reference. Now, that will give us the row. But you also have to tell VLOOKUP which column it's in. Now, the first column always has the value that you're looking up. That's the 2. But we're either going to return something from the second column for expert, third column for int, or fourth column for n. Now, if they were all novices and it was never going to change, we could just type that number in. But it can change. So we're actually going to use a second function in the column index called the match function. Now, this is a lookup function. It's going to look up this n, comma, within some lookup array, the field headers at the top, F4 to lock it. Now, what does match do? Match doesn't return anything, but it tells you the relative position of the lookup value n within this array of values. What is it? Relative position 1, 2, 3, or 4. Boom, it's a 4. It's as if the match function was made perfectly for the column number in VLOOKUP. Now, comma, match type, we're looking up this range of values is not sorted, so we have to use exact match. Now, when I close parentheses, check what, and I should backspace and do that again. What's so polite about these screen tips, as you enter the arguments in a function and type commas, it will bold the argument you're filling out. But as soon as I do the close parentheses, watch what happens to the screen tip. Boom, it goes back to VLOOKUP. So that way we know that the match is sitting in the column index. That match will work perfectly. When it sees an n, it will tell VLOOKUP 4. When it gets down, when I copy the formula down here and it sees an int, it'll say column 3. We'll prove that to ourselves in just a moment. Now, the VLOOKUP also needs either exact match or approximate. We are doing an exact match. We have some numbers and text here. Now, you can put the false, and lots of people like it because you can just double-click the drop-down. But false in Excel can also be represented with a 0. And so that's the way I tend to do all of my exact matches in all the different lookup functions. All right, now I'm going to close parentheses. Notice the lookup function over here. I'm going to close this off. And sure enough, now the screen tip disappears. I can enter this, Control Enter, and I can copy this down. Is that totally amazing? Look at that. It got it perfect. So 5 and int, it goes down to the 5th row, and then it goes over to the 3rd column, gets the 15, and brings it back to the cell. Now, let's prove to ourselves that our formula is working correctly. I'm going to look at a formula that is looking at an n, and then look down here at one that's looking at an int. I'm going to click in the cell, and there's a formula evaluation feature that is just amazing. I'm going to go to Data. Whoops, not data, formulas, and evaluate formula. Or you can use the keyboard Alt-MV. And check this out. It'll step through the function and show you exactly how it's calculated. Now, you can either click with your mouse on evaluate, or you can hit enter. Now, right now, it's looking at C4. When you see the underline, it says, hey, I'm going to show you what this equals. So I hit enter or click on this. It shows me a 5. Now it's jumping over here inside the match. It's looking up an n, and what does it deliver? A 4 right to the column index for VLOOKUP. And then finally, VLOOKUP returns a 14. I'm going to click escape. I'm going to come down here, Alt-MV, enter, 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 and no way. Match is doing just what it's supposed to. It's returning a 3 for int. And VLOOKUP returns a 15. Two lookup functions together. Now, these NAs are annoying, so let's amend our formula so that when we get an NA, instead of showing an NA, it'll show nothing. So I'm going to click up in cell E3 and hit the F2 key. That puts it in edit mode. Now, there's a few ways we can do this, and this is a small data set, so I'm just going to use the easiest, the new IFERROR. So this IFERROR function, I'm going to hit Tab here, is new in Excel 2007. If you have earlier versions, this doesn't exist. But check this out. IFERROR is great because you just run whatever it is. If it sees a value, the function is asking, and I'll come to the end and type a comma. It's asking, hey, what do you want to see if it's an error? You could put whatever you want. I'm going to put the syntax for show nothing, double quote, 2 double quotes in a row. That's actually a null text string. Close parentheses, and that's our formula. Control Enter, and I'm going to copy this down. The cool thing about this is as we come to our next race and type 7 int, there it pops up. So totally automated. Now, I'm going to delete this right here. We haven't entered that. Notice right here, there's no data validation, but up there, there is. And I want the same data validation down here that's up here. I could run the 2 data validations again, but check this out. This is a great trick. If you highlight these 2 cells and copy, Control-C, come down here, Control-V, it actually copies the formatting and the data validation. So just like that, now I have that same data validation drop down from above. Now, our next part is going to be a formula that automatically finds the 4 biggest. There's a great function called large. Now, large, you give it an array of values, and you highlight the whole column, including the ones that we haven't entered yet. This one's separate, so we're not including it. And we're not going to copy this anywhere, so we don't have to worry about locking it. And I'm going to type a comma to get to that K. The K just says, hey, tell me which biggest. So if I typed a 1, that'd give me the max. If I typed a 2, that'd give me the second biggest. If I typed a 3, that'd give me the third biggest. But guess what? I want the 4 biggest. So here's the trick. You have to use array syntax. And array syntax means, hey, I want to put 1, 2, 3, and 4 so that the large function gives me all 4 of those values. You have to type a curly bracket and then 1, 2, 3, 4. End curly bracket. That will instruct from the k argument, the large to return 4 items. Now, this is an array formula. What this means is that k argument is expecting a single value. We're going to give it more than one value. Anytime you do that, you're making a function argument array operation. Now, that sounds all fancy and everything, but all it means is that it's telling large to get all 4 simultaneously. Now, in Excel, if I were to hit Enter,
17.
it can only show me the first one because the cell can only hold one thing. But let's put this in edit mode. Now, we could run Formula Evaluator, but here's another trick. Highlight the formula element you want to look at and evaluate, and then hit the F9 key. You can see that the large is doing exactly what we wanted. It's adding, it's delivering the 4 biggest values. Now, be sure to Control Z on that because we don't want to leave that hard-coded. Well, what's our goal here? It's to add, so I'm simply going to put it inside the sum function. The sum function will know what to do with those 4 values, which, of course, is to add. Now, this is beyond the scope of this video, but in array formulas, we're using, there's a special keystroke you have to use to enter an array formula. But when you enter an array constant like this, it doesn't require that special keystroke, so you just hit Enter. And no way. Watch this. If I had made a mistake up here, and actually there was a first place, that will return a 19, and immediately that updates. Notice how the whole thing is automated, right? And if I come here, actually, let's run our formula evaluator, Alt-MV, Enter, and you can see, sure enough, inside there, it's got that new 19. All right, I'm going to click Escape. Now, our next goal is to calculate points from local races. Remember, we have a table. Now I'm going to move this column F back. I'm going to click and drag. Right, and the rule is you have to have 6 races to qualify. And then bonus points, 7 races equals 1 bonus, 8 points equals 2, 9, 3, and 10, 4. So we have the same situation, a lookup, based on this lookup value. So I'm going to come here, points from local races equals VL tab. The lookup value is going to be this 7, comma, the table, this column right here. First column, look it up. The second column, it'll return something and bring it back to the cell, comma, in this case, we only have values from the second column that we're going to return, so we just simply type a 2. And then this is a sorted column. So if we were to type a comma, we could use approximate match, but that's the default. If you leave it out, it knows to do approximate match. So I'm going to close parentheses, and boom. If I change this and I race 8, it automatically updates. Now watch this. If I only had 5, can't be in state final. That's because we were smart enough to put that here so it returns it, right? So we have to keep going until this is 6, or in our case, 7. Points from final, that's going to be easy. If we had points there, I'm just going to put some pretend, actually, not pretend. We need the same exact formula from up here. Notice the lock cell references and all these 2 right here, and the relative cell references will work. So I can simply copy and paste. Now I did Control C. What's the keyboard for paste? Control V. Now if I were to enter something like 8, int, and there it would show up. So this formula, once we enter it here, is simply equals that right there. Enter. And now we can do our final summation, the sum function, highlight those cells. And now we have an automated state point BMX calculator. So as we finish the races here, Vernon, we did not qualify. So, there's a 0. That's popping up from over there. Everett, Everett did not qualify either. Int. And then the Sumner, miraculously, we got a 4th or something like that. And so there we have it. Oh, no, we'll change this so that this will update down here. We got a 2nd. And there we go. Now, I want to do one last thing here, and it involves the cells that we have control over. These are these cells right here. All of the other cells in here, we don't want to have the chance of actually deleting them or changing them. So there's a protection feature. So under Review, we have Protect Sheet. However, if we just click Protect Sheet, it would protect all the cells. We want to actually not protect the cells that the user's allowed to change. So with those cells, and by the way, I highlighted here, and if I want to highlight cells not next to each other, non-contiguous cells, I hold the Control key. And then so those are the cells right there we have control over. Now I need to go to the Format Cells dialog box. I could go up and click one of these, or the keyboard shortcut is Control 1. And sure enough, over the last tab is Protection. By default, all 17 billion cells are locked. We are going to unlock just those cells that we want the user to use. Then click OK. Now when we go to Review, Protect Sheet, we could even add a password. It will ask. We can decide what things are the user's allowed to do. We're going to select unlocked cells, but I don't want to select locked cells. The locked cells, I don't even want them to touch them. So the only thing we'll be able to select is unlocked cells, and then click OK. Now check this out. The Tab key will work. Boom, 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 all the way through the spreadsheet. And when you get to the end, it jumps. And then when you get to the last cell that's allowed to be selected, it goes back to the top. Pretty cool. These other cells, I can't click them. Now, if you wanted to unlock this, say you wanted to amend some of the formula, the spreadsheet designer, you simply go back to Review and then Unprotect Sheet. And now anything can be selected. Now, let's do one last test, because I think we still have to amend one of the formulas. What if the whole template started off with nothing, which of course it is. Look at that. It looks like we're getting a num error. These formulas are working fine. Now what's happening here is this formula is asking for the 4 biggest values, and there aren't. So num means it can't find the first, second, third, and fourth. So let's amend this formula the same way we did earlier with the if error. If error, there's the formula or the value, comma, and then value if an error. Earlier we put double quote, which showed nothing. But here we want to say something like not for races yet. One thing you want to be careful of is you want to make sure that when you're in edit mode that your text is spelled correctly. You can even use the keyboard shortcut for spell check, which is F7, right? Because once you enter text in a formula into a cell, spell check will not find any spelling errors. All right, I'm going to close that off and Control Enter. So not for races yet. So now if I come over here and I have a 2 and an N, as soon as we get our 4th race, boom, this is working fine. All right, that's a lot of stuff in one video. We saw some lookup functions. We saw matching VLOOKUP. We saw IFERROR. We saw data validation. We saw how to copy data validation. We even saw a formula for adding the 4 biggest, even some Protect Sheet. All right, we'll see you next video.